the back, if you want to finish getting your food and come on in and sit down, we're going to go ahead and get started. Just get myself organized here. Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the Foundation for Defense of Democracies. My name is John Hanna. I'm Senior Counselor at FDD. Thank you for making the effort to be here today at this discussion of what I think, you have to say was a remarkable, even stunning election result in Turkey just 4 days ago. It certainly surprised and even shocked most of the analysts that I know, not to mention, of course, the pollsters, who I imagine have got a lot of explaining to do this week. I'm certain that it's still far too early for any of us to know or appreciate what the full impact of this resounding victory for President Erdogan and the AKP will be on Turkey's future. But I do have a strong feeling that however events play out in the months and years ahead, it will end up being seen, at least in retrospect, as very, very significant, perhaps even historical in terms of its implications for the type of country and society Turkey will be going forward. The sort of thing that we will look back on as a possible hinge point, a moment in time in the summer and early fall of 2015 when the Turkish polity reached a distinct, even a fundamental, fork in the road and could have gone in one of two very different directions. While it appeared to wrestle with the choice for 5 months, changed its mind maybe a time or two, maybe even had some second thoughts, it then made the fateful decision to plow ahead by re-empowering and even supercharging Erdogan and the AKP. And very likely, at least in my opinion, what's done won't be undone, at least not anytime soon, and not without a lot of turmoil, conflict, and possibly pain somewhere down the line. The last chance exit ramp that might have taken us off Erdogan's super highway to some form of Turkish Putinism may now be in our rear view mirrors for good, not to reappear anytime again soon. Indeed, instead of taking that exit ramp, Turkey may in fact now have veered onto the highway's express lane. And there may well be no going back. As the saying goes, elections have consequences, and my guess is that for better or worse, this particular election will indeed be viewed in hindsight as a very consequential one for Turkey and for all those who care about its future, in particular its Western and democratic allies in NATO. The United States, of course, first and foremost. But after all, I'm just the moderator, so what do I know? And that's why we've got these people to really help us get to the bottom of what happened in these elections and why, and what it might portend for Turkey, the Middle East, and the United States going forward. First, it's a great pleasure to welcome to FDD for what I believe is the first time as a speaker. Is that right? Yeah. Dr. Sinan Ciddi. Sinan is an assistant professor at Georgetown University and the director of its Turkish Studies program. Next, we have Merve Tahiroglu, a research associate extraordinaire, I should say, here at FDD, and a key player in our growing Turkey program. And finally, last but not least, at the far right, we're joined again by my colleague, Aykan Erdemir. Aykan is a non-resident fellow in the Turkish program at FDD, and until this summer was a member of the Turkish parliament representing the CHP, which I think remains Turkey's leading opposition party, although I'm not sure at this point that that's saying very much. But it's good to see you again in Washington, Aykan, and thanks to all of you for agreeing to help shed some light on this important topic. The way this will work is that I'll spend about a half hour posing questions to the panel, and then we'll throw it open to the audience for your questions for the rest of our time, and we'll got an eye toward concluding right at about 1:15. So let me get us started then by opening it up to the kind of obvious question, and I'm going to ask you, Aykan, maybe to get us started off. And the question is, what exactly happened last Sunday? How did we get from a situation just 5 months ago with the AKP at something like 41% of the vote and struggling to a significant degree to a situation where it's jumped now to almost 50% and looking quite triumphant and vindicated in its strategy? What went into the victory? What made it possible? Why don't you talk to us what you've seen in in whatever exit polling we have, and then we can let Sinan and Merve add any points they have.
Thank you. It's great to be back here, and thanks to the audience. After all, this is a panel who got the elections completely wrong, just like the rest of the pollsters and analysts. Thank you for still giving credit to what we have to say. Let me begin by 3 anecdotes, which should have told us that there is trouble ahead. One was the exit poll after the June elections. 1 out of 5 MHP voters said, if I knew the election would end like this, what they meant was a hung parliament, they said I would have voted otherwise, meaning I would have voted for the AKP so that there would be a single party majority. So that's number 1. Number 2 was our last FDD panel here after the elections, and one of you in the audience asked us, how about the HDP? And I said, well, HDP will clear the 10% threshold. Whereas Eric Edelman said, probably. Now, I took that skepticism to be very important, and then I shared it with many of my colleagues. I said, although I said, yes, HDP will clear the threshold, Eric, with all his expertise, said probably. So probably, unlike most of us, he saw there was trouble brewing in Turkey and among the HDP ranks. And the third trouble, 2 days before the elections, most pollsters were predicting around 40 to, let's say, 43%, and Adil Gür came out with 47.5%, something like that. And immediately my colleagues were saying, oh, he must have sold out. I wonder how much money did he receive from the AKP to come up with this poll. And I said, no, this is bad news. If Adil Gür polled 47.5, something bad is happening, and it's happening within the last few days. So it was basically a tectonic shift, and the exit polls also show that it was a tectonic shift, most probably within the last week, and probably driven by fear more than anything else, fear and panic. And I think AKP and Erdogan and Davutoğlu, maybe as a duo, they appeared to be a guarantee of, don't ask me where the logic in this is, but they happened to appear as the guarantee for security, stability, and safety. And I know it's quite counterintuitive for many of us in thinking in the liberal democratic paradigm, but even the ISIS suicide bomb attack in Ankara, which led to 100 casualties, according to the exit polls, helped the AKP, meaning 1 in 20 Turkish citizens, 5% of the Turkish citizens, said they changed their vote after the Ankara bomb attack to AKP. Now, this is very difficult to explain. Let's say at a political, at a scholarly level, but on a moral level, I think it hurts even more. In fact, a lot of the Turkish citizens are still trying to come to basically accept this. It's quite something to digest. How could a society vote for a party that was first and foremost responsible for some of the atrocities? But let's leave that there and go to the major dynamics. My argument is, just like many other analysts now, ex post fact, now that we've seen the results, it makes a lot of sense for us to say that PKK's violence, as well as the Islamic State violence, did help the AKP at the polls in two different ways. PKK, first and foremost, hurt the HDP vote. HDP did benefit a lot from people who chose to vote for HDP during the last week. In fact, during the last day, who made up their minds during the last day in the June elections. This time, there was none of that. Meaning, because of PKK's hardline tactics, I think HDP did lose significant support, and there was none of that last day tactical vote or pity vote. Now, on another level, the PKK also helped the AKP through defections from the MHP. So PKK's strategy of violence had an interesting two different set of results. One was exodus from HDP to AKP. This was mainly the religious Kurds. And the other one was the nationalist Turks from MHP to the AKP. Again, what we see that there was almost no voter deciding to vote for the MHP on the last day or within the last week, according to the exit polls. So almost all undecided voters went for the AKP. And I think mostly it was the PKK violence / the IS violence. So it was this environment of fear, political violence. Sure, there was also an economic side to it, that is the devaluation of the lira, let's say the instability in the markets. The real estate markets are not doing very well within the last month, and Turks do care a lot about the real estate. It's a major part of the Turkish economy. It's part of the Turkish, basically, quote unquote, what was believed to be the Turkish miracle, and many people thought that it would one day go bust, and there were signs that it could be over. So all that, I think, led to a panic, both vis-a-vis political stability and economic stability. And interestingly, Erdogan brought that wave of fear and violence back into power. Now, my overall comment is this was a decisive moment in Turkish history. That is, if you believe in path dependency, this is one of those major turning points in Turkish history. It could have been the way out of competitive authoritarianism. Again, as someone whose predictions didn't come out to be that correct, I would like to predict that this will mean maybe a long path-dependent kind of getting stuck in competitive authoritarianism as the AKP further builds a party state in Turkey, as it brotherrizes the society and the bureaucracy and the media and the businesses more alongside the Ikhwanist ideology. It's really shocked, now that that exit from competitive authoritarianism is no longer there. In hindsight, it's really a pity that the opposition parties missed this historical opportunity, because it doesn't come that often. There will be a huge incumbent advantage the next time in 2019 when we have local, national, and presidential elections together, which could be even a bigger disaster scenario. So probably the next 4 years will be a prelude to that one kind of like a single shot, kind of the election to end all elections in Turkey in 2019, because with maybe a single election, combining all three, the AKP could finally get a strong control of all, from the mayoral level to the national level to the presidential level. And so the 4 years, of course, will also see, I think, Erdogan's attempts to turn his de facto executive presidential authority turn into de jure. Right from day one.
Aykan, why don't let's talk about what the implications are going forward, but I just want to see if Sinan or Merve have any comments on what they saw happening, or any additions they may want to make about the dynamic on election day and what the leading up period to it. Go ahead.
I concur with everything Aykan just said. I think stability was the main reason why we see the results that we see now. And I think the economy played maybe a bigger role than many analysts think. And the reason for that is that the lira had been depreciating. And I think since January, it had depreciated by 25% or so. And within the hour of this election, the results coming in on Sunday, I started getting Reuters messages that the lira started picking up by 3%, increasing by 3%. And I think that shows how much one single party government of the AKP could help, at least in the short term, some economic stability. And I think this is what many of the voters went for. So I just wanted to add that.
Yes, I think Koray Çalışkan got it wronger than all of us. And so I feel very sorry for him in terms of who got it wrong the most, if it was a game that was well played. Just to add 2 points so we can go on from here. I don't disagree with anything that's said. I think the 2 things are worth pointing out. The environment in which these elections were fought, as well as the June 7th elections, this is the most caustic and threatening and vengeful atmosphere that Turkish elections have ever been held, as far as I can remember, with the possible exception of the 1950s. And I think that's going to play out more in the post-electoral season, and I think members of parliament, members of NGOs, civil society organizations who have been critical of the government will now feel the full force of the Erdogan machine. So that's something to watch out for. But I think, we have no evidence to question the veracity or the falseness of the electoral results, although there were some analysts who initially questioned, saying, to what extent do you think the electoral results are actually fair and free? We don't have any evidence. The election monitors, they said, European powers, Turkish monitors, they're saying there were several inconsistencies and intimidation at the ballot box, but overall, there doesn't seem to be a lot of bad smoke coming out of what took place. That being said, that doesn't mean nothing untoward happened. I'm a political scientist. In 3 months, I have never seen electoral results shift so much in any of the comparative countries that I've studied. It looks highly suspicious from certain aspects, but I don't have the evidence, so I cannot say anything on that level. But what we should watch out for is if evidence was to be presented in due course by journalists, analysts, election monitors who crunch the data more effectively, or look at electoral rolls, who was included as new electoral voters. What extent will those allegations be given breathing room in Turkey's judicial system? My answer is probably none. They will be branded as traitors, they will be branded as enemies of the will of the people, and I think they'll be stamped upon. And there is no institutional structure right now in Turkey's judiciary to hear any of these allegations in court. Those are facts. So how those allegations, if they have ever come about, will be questioned. And I don't think they'll be given a lot of breathing room. And it's also worth mentioning, the disastrous results, and if it was the fault of the political parties by themselves, or if it was the case that people voted for security and rallied around the AKP, it's worth mentioning the conditions under which opposition parties fought these elections. This was not a free and fair contest for political parties. In terms of budgets, we do know that all the opposition parties in parliament receive, in theory as well as the AKP, receive funding directly from the treasury. And it was very hard for these political parties to run a fresh set of elections 3 or 4 months after the June elections. It's expensive. And the CHP, not to mention the HDP and MHP, were already saying, look, we don't have enough funds to necessarily ride a full campaign. That's not true for the AKP in terms of funding opportunities. We don't know where that money comes from. It's an unfair money competition. Access to media. You can talk about media capture and the extent to which opposition parties have not been given the same amount of broadcasting time, interviews on TV, and that's another thing to bear in mind. And also, I'll stop here, the entire resources of the Turkish state were mobilized to see the incumbency of Erdogan and the AKP continue. Access to meetings in towns. To what extent were individuals and parties able, to the same extent, to have meeting space set up to have opposition parties speak. To what extent was the security of political parties ensured above and beyond those of AKP? And the answer to that is Ankara.
Great. Thank you. I was going to ask a question about fraud, but I take it that there seems to be some unanimity that at least we don't have evidence of it yet. And I don't have evidence of it, but I would only refer people, and they can make of it what they will, to a November 3rd item that Michael Rubin published in commentary. And whatever you think of Michael, he does give some facts and figures that he claims are accurate, talking about the number of registered voters by various election years over the last 15 years. And there's one striking statistic. He says that in 2011, 4 years ago, there were 52.8 million registered voters in Turkey. Last June, so over that 4-year period, June of 2015, there were 54.8 million, increase of 2 million registered voters over the course of 4 years. Michael reports that in November 2015, over the course of 5 months, now that number of registered voters had increased to 56.9 million people, an increase of just over 2 million. So over the course of 5 months, there were an increase in the voter rolls that equaled the increase of the previous 4 years, and he simply raises the question of what does it mean? Somebody ought to look at that and figure it out. And that seems to make some sense to me, that it ought to be something that people look at, and before we do reach the conclusion that there was very minimal voter fraud or irregularities here. And I would also just, I don't know if any of you have got it at your fingertips, but I think Sinan mentioned, even if these were free elections, they were certainly horribly unfair. I don't think that can be underscored strongly enough. If you look at the series of incidents that took place, even leaving aside these horrible terrorist incidents in Suruç and then in Ankara a couple of months later, but just in terms of the intimidation of the media, the outright thuggery in the streets of going after, burning party offices, attacking prominent journalists, taking over entire media conglomerates and turning them virtually overnight from opposition media into pro-government media. Really quite astounding, and my sense is over the last 3 or 4 days, there's been no let-up in the amount of activity that's happening. So, can I just ask and maybe Aykan was referring to this, you said that Suruç and Ankara in particular played into the hands of the AKP, but just as analysts, there's plenty of speculation and conspiracy theories out there about the amount of police and investigative work that might have happened after Suruç to go after the Islamic State cells inside of Turkey, and it might not have been quite as vigorous as it otherwise could have been. Do you all put any credence in those kinds of rumors or theories or speculations? It's for anybody.
No, I think it's a very strange kind of feeling when you hear the name of the suicide bomber announced after the Ankara bombing, and you say, oh, I know this person. In fact, you say, oh, I've known his name for the last 2 years. And in fact, he was on the news, and his parents were interviewed, and his parents appealed numerous times to the police to detain the suspect. So this is the context in which the Ankara suicide bombing took place, meaning this cell in Adıyaman, who happened to be at the core of the Islamic State suicide bomber network in Turkey, was very well known. It was in the news, it was in, for example, some of the CHP reports. The parents were on record. The police had their names, photos. They drove over 700 kilometers from Gaziantep. They went through police checkpoints. They were stopped and checked and then allowed to proceed on to Ankara. So these are the facts, and you do the interpretation. You know, we can either say that this was gross incompetence on the part of the Turkish security, or you can say that the state turned a blind eye, or maybe in a couple of years, as it happened with many other cases in Turkish history, we might suddenly discover that the state was complicit. To be frank, I was there at the bombing site on the week anniversary to lay carnations, and when I went there, I didn't feel secure at first. There were, again, only a few police officers, but then I saw the volunteer youth doing the security work for themselves, and then I felt secure. And this was the feeling of all the participants there, meaning this is a moment in Turkish history when citizens no longer trust their own security forces, and they feel safer when they don't see police around and when they see volunteer youth doing the security work. And this, of course, is the road to, I don't know what to call it, Pakistanization, Lebanization, this kind of gradual move towards a failed state when communities begin to take care of basic state functions such as security by themselves.
While everybody is thinking about those questions, I also just want to add that Turkey had 3 ISIS-linked bombings over the last 6 months, and all 3 of those were targeting the same type of group, and mainly HDP supporters, I have to say, because the first one was actually at an HDP rally in June, and that was the target of the bombers. The second one was for a group of people, left-wing volunteers, who were trying to cross into Kobani to help with reconstruction efforts. So again, largely HDP supporters. And the third one was for peace rally, and again, left-wing Turks. So just 3 facts that can help with as we ask the same questions that Aykan just asked.
Let me just talk quickly about the HDP and how badly you think it's been hurt here. The power relations between it and the PKK. What's your assessment on that? Are they badly hurt here? Are they still a force to be reckoned with? Any chance that they would be a peace party that at some point in time the AKP might turn back to? Merve, can I get you to talk a bit about this?
Yeah, well, the HDP compared to June definitely clearly lost votes, and I think it's about 1 million votes that according to the numbers, yeah, it's about 1 million votes that they lost. But I think the one positive, the positive thing we can take out of this election, of this outcome, is that if we look at the geography and if we look at what the votes that the HDP lost translated into, we can see that the HDP didn't lose liberal Turkish voters that support the party. I mean, HDP, for those of you who don't know, is a predominantly Kurdish party, which achieved something major in June by becoming the first predominantly Kurdish party to pass the nationwide election threshold and enter parliament. And the HDP is the problem. The trouble for this party is that it's trying to get a coalition of constituencies, so to speak, and that includes nationalist Kurds in Turkey, who feel Kurdish nationalists, conservative, pious Kurds who have a history of voting for conservative parties such as the AKP, and also liberal Turks. And to try to get all 3 of those constituencies at once was a very difficult task to begin with, and they managed to do this in June, which I think was a huge step for Turkey's democracy, and they lost it. They lost some of it, and what they lost was the conservative Kurds. They did lose some votes from liberal Turks who were previously CHP supporters, but it was minimal compared to how much they lost from conservative pious Kurds and those who deserted the HDP and reverted back to the AKP. So I think that's a positive thing to remember about this election, even though the HDP lost.
Can I just ask on that point, because I think there was some feeling, especially after June, that something fundamental had changed in Kurdish politics inside of Turkey, that whether it was after Kobani, the failure of the peace settlement, the restarting of the conflict with the PKK, that in fact that movement of conservative Kurds that abandoned AKP, that something had really happened in terms of the Kurdish vote and Kurdish political worldview inside of Turkey that perhaps was irreversible. That clearly doesn't appear to have been the case. I mean, does what happened tell us something that this Kurdish population inside of Turkey is in fact much more complicated and diverse and willing to float around in terms of its political outlook and view and its orientation toward the broader transnational movement for Kurdish nationalism or autonomy? What do you think?
I would say that some of the gain the HDP made in the June elections is still there. So I would still argue that for some of the Kurds, and particularly some of the religious Kurds, the transformation could be quite decisive. And they stuck with the HDP even after all this. But again, the defection back to AKP should tell us about how pragmatic, flexible the Kurdish vote still can be. And one big sign of the trauma of the last 5 months on the Kurdish voters comes from the Ipsos exit poll. In June exit poll, 29% of all voters found Selahattin Demirtas, the HDP leader, to be the most successful leader of the campaign. This is a 16-point surplus on top of the party vote. The party received 13%. It means there were 16% voting for other parties who found Demirtas to be the most successful leader. Now, I would argue that the PKK destroyed that in 5 months. Selahattin Demirtas came down to 12% this November. That is, he is now only liked by his own party constituency, meaning he lost support in the rest of the society, which connects us, brings us back to the connection between leadership and the Kurdish vote. Because just like ethnic Turks are very leadership-oriented, Turkey's ethnic Kurds happen to be also very leadership-oriented. And I think perception of leadership makes a big difference on people's consciousness. Now this, I know it's a strange kind of an argument, saying that mid to long-term sociological, cultural trends have as much to do with leadership as it is to do with society and culture and geopolitics. But in the Kurdish case, that seems to be what we have here, meaning parallel to Demirtas losing his leadership credibility because of the PKK attacks, religious Kurds were being almost kind of stolen by the AKP back into an AKP ideology.
Okay, I'm going to ask one more, and then I'm going to go to the audience, and if I can get each of you to comment on it, or maybe not, depending on what the initial speakers say, but just on the question of AKP and particularly Erdogan going forward. What does he take from this election, and how do you think, what's your guess about how he proceeds on the key issues, either domestically in terms of consolidating power, the executive presidency, the fight against the Kurds, crackdown on his opponents? What do you see in your crystal ball? I'll start with you, Sinan.
So my Magic 8 Ball says, picking up on something that Aykan said at the beginning in terms of Turkey heading further down into the realm of competitive authoritarianism, I think as time goes by, particularly the fact that we don't have elections, as you said, until 2019, any sort of election really, you could take the competitiveness increasingly out of that phrase and more in terms of just continued path down to authoritarianism. And this is a very scary and very undetermined path. Something that political scientists have been already warning about, even prior to the November 1 election, saying, this is completely uncharted territory for Turkey. We don't necessarily have an idea of what's going to bedevil Turkey should Erdogan get his way and the AKP get his way. And I think that scary reality is now very much upon us, because the post-electoral scene looks to be a very vengeful one. I think already we've had numerous journalists being intimidated following the election. Some have already been fired. As of this morning, another television station, Samanyolu, has been shut down. And I think this is just a sort of premonition of what's to come. I think from the perspective of opposition media, dissident scholars, mild to engaged critics of the regime or of Erdoganism, or what they call the new Turkey, or what they will refer to as Turkey's national will, as embodied in the AKP and Erdogan. All of these dissidents and criticisms against that are what we'll refer to be as enemies of the state. And this really is very dangerous. And it's dangerous because, I'll reiterate something I said earlier on, the institutional framework of the state, the departments, the agencies of the government, they've been hollowed out. Turkey's judiciary was never independent, or never, in my opinion, sort of a supporter of law and order in terms of judicial independence. But it's been made far worse under the last few years by Erdogan, who's made it a much more AKP or Erdogan-compliant judiciary. There is no oversight over anything. I mean, the government spending of agencies and spending reports and government audits have been suppressed in Parliament. Since I probably for the last 4 or 5 years, we don't know what the government has spent on what. It's back, the AKP shuts it out of Parliament. But in terms of what's, my crystal ball says, the more that we see the next few months, they're not going to lose any time on drumming up enough votes and transforming Turkey's regime from largely a parliamentary one to a presidential one. Now, they are 14 votes short right now of what is required to take any constitutional changes to a public referendum. But that's not beyond them. Party defections, purchasing of votes, anything that can be talked about behind closed doors to secure another 14 votes to get 331, the magic number, is now on the agenda of the government. You have a completely compliant party that is behind Erdogan now. Any talks of opposition within the AKP, I think, are going to be suppressed and sort of wither away. No individual charismatic leader stands to challenge the AKP's leadership or Erdogan's will. The institutional framework of the state has been so compromised over the last few years that forces of law and order will not question whether the elections were fair, corruption allegations in the past, or anything that challenges the will of the AKP to rule. I think this is the most dangerous place that we've ever found Turkey in.
Merve or Aykan, can I just get you to comment on where we're headed on the Kurdish conflict in particular, both inside of Turkey and then maybe more broadly on the Syria front in particular? If you do it relatively quickly, that'd be great.
Yeah, I'll be very quick. I think in the short term, we're going to continue seeing a war with the PKK. I think the Turkish government is going to continue going after them in northern Iraq and in southern Turkey. But I think eventually, in the medium to long term, it is in the AKP's interest, Erdogan's interest, and Turkey's interest, and the PKK's interest to get back to the negotiating table. So I think that will happen, but not soon.
And their interlocutor, you think, will be Öcalan? Will be Öcalan, not the HDP. No. Aykan, anything you disagree with, or can you just quickly on the Syria problem?
I would agree that the default state is crackdown on the Kurds. There's a lot of talk of the Sri Lankan model, and clearly by AKP pundits who don't know anything about geography. About the difference between Sri Lanka and Kurdistan. But then, vis-a-vis how they will proceed, there are two options. I think Erdogan is super pragmatic at this point. It depends on who is willing to work with him towards an executive presidential system. If the HDP is willing to do it, it might mean for Turkey an executive presidential system plus some regional autonomy and some, let's say, progress on the Kurdish peace process. If MHP is willing to play along with Erdogan, it could mean spiraling down into a crazy Sri Lankan model, which will end up disastrous.
And just quickly, given sort of the reintroduction of the military as kind of a partner or ally, at least tactically, of Erdogan's in this fight against the PKK, do they have a say in how he proceeds on that? Can he go back to a settlement if it suits him politically, or is there a new factor here that could play on this?
It's very difficult to tell. It seems that there is a wonderful alliance going on, because the day after the elections, the crackdown was not only on the media and the Kurds and the opposition, it was also on the Gulen community, and it was basically taking revenge on the networks that went after the officers. So the military is enjoying part of this, not the whole story. I think the military knows the best that there can't be a Sri-Lankan model, because they would know best that they would really suffer very heavy casualties if they went on an all-out war against the PKK. So far, I think I would still argue that it's a pragmatic relationship between the military and the Erdogan, but it's a pragmatic relationship which could really end up disastrously based on Erdogan's deal with either the HDP or the MHP. But it's also highly likely that both deals could fail and Erdogan could go on his own. He's super confident now more than ever, so he might be willing to try it, force it on his own.
Okay, great, thank you. I'm going to now, I think we have close to a half hour for questions, so if you can raise your hand, identify yourself, wait for the mic, and as much as you can, keep it to a question so we can get as many people involved as possible. That would be terrific. Yes, this gentleman in the back. And try and limit yourself to one question if you can.
I promise. Jason Epstein, South 5 Strategies. Question for Aykan. Aykan, you began your talk by mentioning MHP. And historically, I feel like at these conferences, MHP really doesn't get discussed enough. So my question would be, what happens to Bacili, the party leader? Was he being completely unreasonable by flatly turning down the notion of a coalition back in June, or was that not a realistic scenario? Thanks.
Shall I answer now?
Yeah, please, go ahead.
Bahçeli's game plan from our sources within the MHP was, he said, we'll just wait it out, AKP will disappear, and we will be the main center-right party in Turkey. Now, I know now especially it looks tragically funny.
But he will keep his job.
But he will, yes, he will keep his job, even after purging the best and brightest from his candidate lists. But the exit polls show us something even scarier. I think the exact reverse is about to happen. In the exit polls, people said, if I knew the election results, they said, we would have voted for the AKP even more, and for the MHP even less. So now the voter feeling is, oh, we should have pushed the MHP down the 10% threshold. Now this is, I think, a disastrous exit poll, which means I think MHP will continue to bleed, so that there is no pity from the voter, whereas last time MHP voters pitied the AKP. They said, oh, we should have voted for the AKP to avoid a hung parliament. But this time they're very angry at their leader. Bahçeli's approval rate was already very low, 8%. Now it's 3%. So 1 in 4 MHP voters thinks Bahçeli is a successful leader, and others think he's a complete failure.
But he'll stay.
Which is amazing. Quickly on CHP, do you expect any change in leadership there?
Yes, I do. We have, CHP will have in December, most probably, a party convention, which is a regular scheduled party convention. And already there are a couple of names floating around. So most probably CHP will have an orderly, kind of a multiple candidate contestation and probably a leadership change. And 56% of the electorate says there should be a new leader to CHP, and that's 80% for Bahçeli in the overall electoral poll.
And Just on the issue, I think Sinan referred to it, we're not going to see any fracturing of the AKP. Whatever those theories were before this vote, it looks like that's probably impossible now. But is there anywhere that a new center-right party could arise that would be able to appeal to the same kind of conservative and even religious constituency that Erdogan represents, but with a more democratic face? Or is that, there's no sign of it?
I mean, I don't think there's any sign of it. I mean, dissidents within the AKP, and we kind of know who they are, going down from the former president Abdullah Gül to Bülent Arınç to maybe Ali Babacan, these people. I mean, if anything, they're very coy. They're interested in biding their time to see if there's a momentum that would help see sort of something that might help them realize a new backing within and outside of parliament. That doesn't appear right now. I mean, it would be political suicide, if not more, to actually challenge the incumbency right now.
Yeah. Okay, great, thank you. Yes, this gentleman right here in the middle. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Gerald Robbins, Foreign Policy Research Institute. Let me piggyback on that question that was just given. Are we basically looking at CHP sort of hitting a demographic wall that they can't seem to get beyond the 25% vote tally? And if such is the case, if we're looking at it in terms of a generational situation, does this mean that HDP is going to be the recipient of probably future CHP voting?
Let's try to answer it together with Merve. Let me give the CHP end and we can give the HDP end. I think what we see happening is up until the June elections, CHP was doing quite well among the younger voters. Although it didn't do much to gain young votes, somehow the younger segment did end up voting for the CHP. But then, I think with Demirtas, especially within the last year, we see that HDP is the most successful party among the youth. And probably that's a trend to stay. And there are two components to it. One is, of course, the Kurdish demographics. A greater proportion of Turkey's youth happens to be Kurdish. That's a plus for the HDP. But also among the Turkish youth, we see that HDP seems to be more popular than the CHP, and it has a lot to do with CHP's gerontocratic kind of structure. Now, the key question is, how does the AKP play into this demographics? Because in the leaked intra-party debates after June, the AKP leadership seemed to be particularly worried about the demographic situation. They said, we're losing out on the youth vote because AKP was the worst. Proportionately, they were the worst of the four parties among the youth. So they said, we have to do something. In fact, one minister complained, the more universities we have, the more people, vote for other parties. So there were some jokes, we should close down all the universities to win elections. But now it seems, we have to see the breakdown of the exit polls. I don't have the crosstabs yet. AKP might have found a way to tap back into the youth vote, but maybe Merve knows more about that.
I've seen that in the numbers I've seen, it looks like the AKP was the biggest winner among the youth votes this time around in November. Huge change in 5 months. But about the difference between the CHP and the HDP, and I think the CHP stands for the Turkey's liberal secular party, right, progressive. But among the youth, it might appear to many young voters as a little bit of an outdated party. And what Demirtas did with the HDP was to actually propose a progressive party. The HDP had more female candidates than all other parties. The HDP had LGBT candidates, and they were going around with this campaign, basically not only against Erdogan's authoritarian leanings or the AKP, but genuinely showing this progressive nature with all sorts of minority candidates and even in their platform. So I think it for the youth especially that would have naturally voted for the CHP, it provided this alternative. And we did see a bit of a shift from the CHP to the HDP, but I don't think it was enough to actually replace the CHP as it was, and it's not. And as long as the PKK continues to be a factor, obscuring the HDP and then whatever the Demirtas promises and can deliver or cannot, I don't think the HDP will become the next CHP. I think the CHP will remain there because of the PKK.
And can I just add one sentence?
Yeah, very quickly.
A typical family demographic would be something like this. The parents' generation would be CHP voters, the second generation would be HDP voters, and with the Kurdish voters, the grandpa would be center-right True Path or Motherland, the father would be AKP, and the son or daughter would be HDP. So it's Turkey has a very, I think, systematic generational way of voting, and it has a lot to do with also intra-family conflict as well.
But I think this applies mostly to middle class families, so maybe not so much for the lower, mid-income, I think, in class.
Yeah. Okay, there was a question. Yes, Hillel in the back, please.
Thanks. Hillel Fradfield, Hudson Institute. My question really starts from what I understood to be a comment of Dr. Erdemir about I think you referred to it as the twisted logic of stability and instability, by which if I understood you correctly, to mean that it's rather twisted to credit Erdogan with stability, providing stability when he's been the creator thereof, and sort of to use an old-fashioned American expression, you elect the arsonist to be the fireman, something like that. That worked, obviously, domestically. But my question is how that works down the road in two different ways. First, it amounts, if people become fairly self-conscious about this amounts to sort of understanding that they accept governance as a kind of extortion racket, a kind of mafia, essentially. And that's a kind of unhealthy thing both to exist but also to accept. But that may work domestically. It doesn't work very well internationally because I'll say internationally because you're not in control of the violence. So I wonder what you expect to follow both domestically and internationally. For example, whether Erdogan will, what he will do internationally now, because he's up to now been a very great failure with all the domestic successes.
Now, my prediction is, of course, there will be more political violence, there will be more political chaos, probably there will be brutal suppression of all the opposition, including the media, political parties, NGOs, particularly Kurds and Alevis, I think, will have a difficult time in the days to come. But in the exit polls, Turkey's electorate seems to be very happy about the result. They're happy about the result, they're happy about the vote they casted, and also they said that they have a very positive outlook to Turkey's future. So most probably, I would argue they're mistaken, and all the positive signs, we also see what the economy will probably reverse. As some of the investment bankers I spoke to, they said, this was right before the elections, they said if Erdogan has a single party majority, we expect a revaluation of the Turkish lira, a boom in the Turkish real estate sector and the stock market, and that's the window of opportunity when our international investors will basically leave Turkey, and then we expect a big drop. So I don't know whether this disaster scenario will turn out to be true, but we might be seeing kind of a false spring in Turkey.
Sinan, did you have anything you wanted to add?
Yeah, I mean, I would just say, yes, the lira's gotten a bump, economically speaking, and I think, interest rates have declined slightly and whatnot, etc. But I think the long-term driver of economic stability and for Turkey's domestic development, but also Turkey as an international actor, will come from the degree to which the country is perceived to be a thriving democracy. And there are no signs that I can see that Erdogan is intended to make actually Turkey a free and fair country. Now, you've got the situation whereby they will have to take very pragmatic steps and listen to big business as well as small and medium-sized business to actually really instigate a lot of fundamental reforms that can sort of prop up the economy. But none of the underlying conditions of what keeps the Turkish economy unstable and at high risk have been removed thus far. And if they go down the road of actually silencing opposition, intimidating the press and media, if they crack down on the Doğan Media Group, for example, and continue to go after scholars because that's how they think, like playing whack-a-mole, that's how you get rid of opposition and rule the country, well, fine, that works in the short term, but in Turkey will become increasingly internationally isolated, I think, in terms of reputation. But how it will behave in terms of, I agree with you 100%. I mean, there are so many fires around Turkey right now that Turkey cannot alone control. The only thing that Turkey benefits from right now is a robust and strong-handed regime that can make decisions and have those decisions listened to. But in terms of what kind of partner Turkey can be to its alliance structures, to its international partners, the United States, NATO, the European Union, I would have very heavy question marks in terms of who we are actually dealing with.
Another question. Okay, these two gentlemen, and let's take them at the same time, one after the other.
Thank you. Sinan from Turkish Press. Very quick question with two sides, and anyone wants to answer it. What do you expect from the Obama administration going forward for its relation with Ankara? And second side of it, how should this administration handle this Turkish administration going
Okay,
forward?
behind you, please.
Mustafa Gürbüz, American University. I'm just looking at the Yalçın, Akdoğan, and others' statements after the election, and it seems that Erdogan will be pushing for the referendum, and it will be a campaign in which the media, the pro-government media, would be strongly for. And I'm thinking, I assume they would find 14 people from MHP. Let's assume that there would be a referendum campaign in the next few months. So in that sense, I would put this as Erdogan's biggest gamble this time. And I would ask your opinion, in the sense that the Pew Research Center, Erdogan's support each year, in the past year, in this summer, this very summer, the June election, it was 39% drop. And it was also the June election result, about 40% AKP got. So the conservative Kurdish voters who returned back to AKP this time probably would seek stability, but not necessarily one-man rule. So in the referendum, there would be no incentive for such population.
Okay, but the question is, what's going to happen in the referendum? What do we think happens in the referendum? Okay, thank you. The first question, anybody want to talk about what might happen in U.S.-Turkish relations? I imagine a lot could depend in the short term on Syria and YPG questions. We really haven't touched on that. So, Merve, do you want to?
Yeah, can I start this one? Because I think this question sort of relates to the previous question about Turkey's international standing. And I have a rather pessimistic point of view compared to the rest of the panel here. I think Erdogan has little reason to care about what the world thinks about him, so as long as he gets the presidential system. I think that's because he's very much aware of Turkey's, the benefit that Turkey has in its geopolitical place, and especially with everything that's happening in Syria and Iraq, it knows that Turkey is an indispensable strategic ally for the United States, and whatever he does, at least the Obama administration is going to continue working with Turkey as long as the US has access to the Incirlik Air Base. I think Turkey is somewhat helping with the fight against ISIS in Syria. I don't think we're going to necessarily see the Obama administration reprimand Erdogan for his failings on humanitarian record or democracy. So,
Do you not see a potential conflict over the issue of the Syrian Kurds and the YPG in particular as becoming a potential clash point between the administration and Erdogan?
Not more so than it already is, and I think that what we're seeing is, because this has been going on for months now, and yet there is a point of contention about the role of Syrian Kurds, but I think there's what we can actually now say is a bit of a tacit agreement between the U.S. and Turkey, whereby Turkey is sort of tolerating the U.S. cooperation with the YPG, so as long as the YPG doesn't cross the river, and the U.S. is tolerating Turkey, not necessarily taking too much action against ISIS, so as long as they allow the injury to go, basically.
And you don't see that change. You don't see after the election in a stronger position that Erdogan may have an interest in escalating the war against Islamic State, for instance. You don't expect to see a lot more Turkish action against IS.
I think they will actually continue. I think they will have more. They will be a bigger, relatively bigger player in the war against ISIS, but not too much, especially not as much as the Americans would want them to be, because I just don't see the incentive for it.
Okay.
One sentence answer. I think 50% of the Turkish population right now feel like Poles, and they think Obama and Merkel are Chamberlain, and appeasement policy will continue in the years to come. So there is this kind of feeling of being deserted, being left, and being forgotten about, and being sold out, basically, for transactional reasons.
Anybody want to talk about the referendum and what they think would happen, assuming he can get the votes to actually go formally to a referendum?
I mean, I think if it goes through, if they think they find the numbers to cross the magic threshold to put it over 331 seats, I think this is the highest priority on Erdogan's agenda and the government's agenda. I think any and all means will be used to secure a yes vote for changing Turkey's regime from a parliamentary to a presidential system. I don't think there's any doubt of that. This is a one-time opportunity that they will not miss. This is the final thing. And then you'll have a constitution which will read, for all intents and purposes, Article X. The presidency has powers that are limitless, and that is it. And that's how I think it will be. That's what they want to ensure, and this is the major. And nobody's sort of taking a sort of broader view than this. So that's my prediction.
And in the exit poll, 61% of the voters said the executive presidential system is on the agenda. However, 57% said Turkey should remain a parliamentary system, and only 31% said Turkey should have executive presidentialism, which means Erdogan has to win 20 extra percent. So I think the key question is still the 14 votes. I think it's not yet the referendum that we have to debate, because it's not that easy to find, despite all, the sex videotapes and the blackmailing and whatever threats and so on and so forth, buying of MPs, which have happened during my term. I think still 14 MPs is quite a lot. So we shouldn't rule out an early election. Not immediately. Erdogan still has time. There can be another round of elections for Erdogan to win in an even more unfair campaigning environment, a constitutional majority. I think he can emerge with 331 MPs and then bring it to a referendum.
Okay. Other questions? Yes, sir. Right here. Third row. Wait for the mic. It's right there.
How long do you think it'll take for another getting far? And really believe civil society will tolerate the rapture and symptoms we are observing today?
So I missed the first part.
So can we expect at some point in time, assuming the opposition remains as incapable of really challenging Erdogan in a serious way, do we have to look now to a Gezi 2.0? Is that a possibility, or is this increased powers and authority that he's going to have, is he going to be able to make that impossible?
The youngest in the crowd should answer.
Again, pessimistic. I think if it didn't happen Monday, it's not going to happen anytime soon.
And you have to really ask what's gained by, what do you get protesters and dissidents and the youth of Turkey who do not identify with the AKP feel of the usefulness, the instrumentality of participating in public protest? The answer is not much. There is not, I'll go back to my sort of, point about institutional capture. I mean, you can have street protests, but at the end of the day, you don't necessarily have a judiciary that's going to prosecute crimes, alleged crimes against governments, or there doesn't seem to be any accountability by the executive right now. there doesn't seem to be any sort of avenue whereby public protest transformed into political accountability, people resigning their positions and responding to public pressure. That seems to have been compromised. So I don't necessarily see another Gezi, if you speak to dissidents or people who participated in the protests in the past, their overwhelming response is, well, this doesn't really achieve anything. All we do is get gassed and go to prison and lose our credibility and our livelihoods. And the noose keeps on getting tightened by the authorities. Law enforcement agencies are given unprecedented power that's not checked by any sort of oversight to prevent use of excessive force. So I don't necessarily see another Gezi 2.0 formation, but we could all be in for a surprise. I don't know.
I would say there might be a Kurdish Gezi, that is, we might see most action in the predominantly Kurdish cities, and in the rest of the country, I think we might expect a turn from institutional politics to kind of NGO activism. There are no elections for the next 4 years, as far as the youth can know, and they'll probably concentrate their attempts on these philanthropic organizations, on vote and beyond kind of ballot box activism, from short-term political gain strategies to mid to long-term societal transformation strategies, which are safer, and which is kind of a good modus vivendi with Erdogan, because Erdogan would be happy about that too, because then he gets the next 4 years to himself. He can do all the institutional redesign, whereas Turkey's young opposition concentrates on more these social, cultural, kind of civic projects that are aiming at the long term.
Great, thank you. Over here, please. Yeah.
Teresa Welsh, U.S. News.
Testing. Sorry.
Teresa Welsh, U.S. News and World Report. A follow-up on the referendum issue. What incentive would other MPs have for supporting the referendum if it would essentially end up in eliminating the system in which they have power, moving to a presidential system? Why would anyone vote for that?
That necessitates a strange logic, and we all know one person who has the strangest logic in Turkish politics, Devlet Bahçeli. He'll come up with the weirdest reason to support it, and probably now I'm trying to put myself in his place. He might say, in exchange for ending the Kurdish peace process and crushing Kurds very heavily, will give support to a presidential system, and then he might, to his inner circle, say this will be the end of Davutoğlu as Erdogan takes the upper hand, and this might then lead to the demise of AKP, and then we'll be the single remaining center-right party. And I know this doesn't make any sense, but in the last decade at least, Bahçeli came up with all sorts of strange reasonings, which all turned out to be horribly mistaken, and he still survives. So this might be the one.
You could also just have the case that, money is also always a good incentive for change, walking the aisle, or positions of power within a new administration in a presidential system, a cabinet position. Look at people like Numan Kurtulmuş, who were, vitriolically opposed to Erdogan and the AKP. Then he suddenly became deputy party chairman, or I don't know his present role now, but Tuğrul Türkeş, another convert over to the AKP. It doesn't necessarily have to be money. It's influence, it's power, it's access to power, it's access and being co-opted into a position of authority.
We have time for one more. Can we run all the way up front here quickly? Run. Yes, please, as quick as you can.
Cem Yolbulan, Washington Institute. I want to go back to the Kurdish aspect here. This might be a little speculative, but what do you think? How do you think PKK perceives the results of this election? Öcalan specifically. Do you think he is happy that they can get Erdogan and Öcalan back in the negotiating table? Do you think they're happy with the decrease in votes HDP had? What do you think?
Anybody want to take that? Speculate a bit on Öcalan or the people in Kandil? Do they have different views? Do we have any idea what Öcalan thinks about what's happened over the last 5 months?
I have no idea what Öcalan thinks, but my analysis would be that the main reason the HDP lost as many votes as it did is the PKK. But we have to remember that the PKK has really had no contact with Öcalan over the last 4 months, so the PKK doesn't really know what Öcalan thinks either. Öcalan wanted especially in the last few years, he wanted the Kurdish problem in Turkey to be resolved in a political manner, and so I don't think he would be happy to see, I mean, especially if the HDP fell below the threshold, I think he would come out with a statement if they let him, with a strong statement, trying to bolster support for the HDP again. I can't see Öcalan being happy that the HDP is losing votes, but like I said, the PKK is not in contact with Öcalan anymore, so we are talking about 2-3 different leaderships for the PKK. There's no unitary PKK anymore.
And I would say that, I don't know whether it's intentional or unintentional, but right now there is more of a playing field for the PKK, because Erdogan will turn back to hardline tactics, and there is quite little the HDP can do, whereas the PKK can once again emerge as the defender of the people, and probably they'll be the center stage of Kurdish politics in the next year.
Okay, unfortunately, we're out of time, so then we're going to try and close this meeting. If you can all join me in thanking our terrific speakers. Thanks again for coming, and I'm sure we'll see you again as the FDD's Turkey program continues to follow these events very, very closely. Thanks very much, everybody.